Let's now move on to the scientific foundation. Is removing or aborting an unborn baby, whether it's called a zygote, a blastocyst, an embryo, or a fetus, any different from removing a tumor? Is the unborn baby a living human being, and if so, can they feel pain? With the availability of 4D ultrasounds, it is impossible to still maintain that old lie that unborn babies are just blobs of tissue. It is well known that the heart begins to beat at 3 weeks. Blood circulation is at 5 weeks. Unique fingerprints, which will never change, are being engraved at 8.5 weeks, and the baby is sucking his thumb by 9 weeks. Can they feel pain? A study was published in March 2017, and it found that preborn babies have a much more advanced nervous system than previously believed, that it developed sooner than once thought, and that the fetus as early as 8 weeks respond to touch. By 10 weeks, the body is sensitive to touch, and the little baby squints, swallows, furrows the brows, and frowns. Now I have a question. If we administered a strong painkiller to someone before killing them, would that make killing them more acceptable? Just because they couldn't feel pain in the way that we think they should feel pain. Furthermore, the world's most premature baby, Richard Scott William Hutchinson, born at 21 weeks, proved that these young babies can survive outside the womb with medical assistance. He recently celebrated his very first birthday. Let's look at more evidence in reproductive science regarding the beginning of life. Former president of the National Medical Association, Dr. Jasper Williams, stated that human life begins when the ovum is fertilized and the new combined cell mass begins to divide. In the National Geographic article In the Womb, it was stated, biologically speaking, human development begins at fertilization. Although life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is formed when the chromosomes of the male and female pronuclei blend in the oocytes. So at conception, the new person's genetic instructions come together for the very first time in what is called a zygote. Reproductive science shows that at the moment of fertilization, when the sperm meets the egg, all the information that builds that person is already present. No new genetic information is ever added. The fertilized ovum is a human being with a unique combination of information never before seen in the history of the earth. So from the earliest moments of development, you were already there. You just couldn't see it yet. Dr. Jerome Lejeune, the father of modern genetics, stated, to accept the fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human has come into being is no longer a matter of taste or opinion, it is plain experimental evidence. Each individual has a very neat beginning at conception. To say that the beginning of human life cannot be determined scientifically is utterly ridiculous. To deny a truth about when life begins should not be made a basis for legalizing abortion. Genetic evidence even forced the pro-abortion magazine New Scientist to admit to this. The task force finds that the new recombinant DNA technologies indisputably prove that the unborn child is a whole human being from the moment of fertilization, that all abortions terminate the life of a human being, and that the unborn child is a separate human patient under the care of modern medicine. Now let's look at this amazing video by Live Action, showing the development of the baby from fertilization up to 10 weeks. So why is there so much confusion on this matter? During the 19th century, Ernst Haeckel was one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Darwinian evolution. He was a professor in zoology, a marine biologist, as well as a qualified medical doctor at the University of Jena. But he's most famous for his fraudulent diagrams. In 1868, he produced a whole range of fake diagrams in which he compared the so-called similarities of human embryos with animals as proof that everything alive had one common ancestor. The human embryos are initially depicted as identical to those of various animals, after which it goes through a whole range of evolutionary changes, passing through a fish stage with so-called gills, an amphibian stage, a reptile stage, and so on, implying that the individual embryo repeats its so-called evolutionary history. It is often referred to as the law of recapitulation, or Haeckel's term the biogenetic law. Well, that law does not exist, and the whole idea is today dismissed as false. In 1874 already, Professor Hess pointed out Haeckel's fraudulent alterations. This year, 2021, that is 147 years ago. The idea even appeared in the world's best-selling childcare book by Dr. Benjamin Spock. He stated that watching a baby grow is full of meaning because the development of each individual child retraces. Retraces to what? The whole history of the human race, physically and spiritually, step by step. Babies start off in the womb as a single tiny cell, just the way the first living thing appeared in the ocean. Weeks later, as they live in the amniotic fluid in the womb, they have gills, like fish. Toward the end of the first year of life, when they learn to clamber to their feet, they're celebrating that period millions of years ago when our ancestors got up off all fours. Michael Richardson is a professor of animal development at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He is not a creationist, but he said that he always knew something was wrong with Haeckel's drawings. In addition, there was no record of anyone actually comparing embryos of species. So he assembled an international team to examine and photograph the external form of 39 embryos from a wide range of vertebrate species at a stage comparable to that depicted by Haeckel. They published their results in 1997 already. Now this photo, with thanks to Prof. Richardson, shows how the different creatures that they investigated were all so radically different that Haeckel's drawings of similar-looking embryos could not possibly have been done from real specimens. By the way, all vertebrate embryos have a series of folds or ridges in their throat area only about halfway through their development. However, Dr. Jerry Bergman explains that the so-called gill slits are neither slits nor gills, but epithelial tissue located in the neck region of the embryo. These structures are now correctly called pharyngeal ridges and pouches by anatomists. Nigel Hawkes interviewed Richardson for The Times in London in an article where Richardson described Haeckel as an embryonic liar. And in the Scientific Journal of Science, volume 288, he stated, "This is one of the worst cases of scientific fraud. It's shocking to find that somebody one thought was a great scientist was deliberately misleading. It makes me angry. What Haeckel did was to take a human embryo and copy it, pretending that the salamander and the pig and all the others look the same at the same stage of development. They don't. These are fakes." And of course today, one of the most tragic consequences of this idea is the argument that the fetus is only in the fish stage, so you're only slicing up a fish, is still being used by some abortionists to convince young girls and women that killing their babies is okay. We can justifiably charge this evolutionary nonsense of recapitulation with responsibility for the slaughter of millions of helpless prenatal children. or at least for giving it a pseudoscientific rationale. And even though Haeckel's fraud was already exposed in 1874 by his evolutionary colleagues and thoroughly falsified through recent comparative studies done by Prof. Richardson, this nonsense still occurs in our children's textbooks today, which is why some people still believe that it's true. Why do we need to waste money on such blatant lies and purely pseudoscientific garbage? Abortion activists constantly proclaim that a woman has a right to do with her body as she pleases, yet they continue to ignore the fact that another body is involved as well. Killing the baby is killing somebody else. Once again, this has been scientifically proven. About half a century ago, when the amazing mechanism of the human immune system was first being discovered, Nobel Prize-winning biologist Sir Peter Medawar declared that the survival of a child in a mother's womb contradicted immunological laws. The immune system normally detects foreign tissue in the body and reacts by setting up a very specific defense mechanism. It is called the killer T cell mechanism, which attacks the foreign tissue. Since the developing embryo is genetically distinct, in other words foreign, we would expect the mother's immune system to attack it. And we know today that this really does happen. Yet, the developing baby survives this killer T cell attack by putting up a very specific defense mechanism. Researchers at the Medical College of Georgia discovered that mammalian embryos produce a special enzyme that suppresses the mother's killer T cell action just before the embryo attaches to the mother's uterus. Interestingly, in human embryos, this happens on day 6, which is a preparation day for day 7, when the new embryo first attaches itself to its mother's womb so that it can draw nutrients from its mother's bloodstream. This is also the exact time when the mother's killer T cells would normally begin to attack and reject the embryo, were it not for the production of the special enzyme on day 6. And interestingly, day 6 of the week is also a preparation day for day 7, the Sabbath of the Lord. So this major argument used by abortionists, that the embryo is just part of the mother's body and that she can do with her body as she pleases, is completely refuted, since this research clearly shows that right from the beginning, the human embryo is not part of the mother's body. From the moment of conception, it has a unique and distinct genetic makeup, with half of the chromosomes from mom, the other half from dad, recombining in unique combinations. The very reason why the mother's defense system will identify it as foreign. And interestingly, even though the father contributed half of this genetic information, no one ever claims that the unborn is part of the father's body. The tiny unborn baby is an entirely separate entity, completely human from the beginning, and we have no right to even contemplate ending his or her life.